Cocuzza, welcome. You are the head of advisory and blending unit at the EIB, at the European Investment Bank, Europe's climate bank. We're gathering here today at the UNDP Center in Rome for the third International Advisory Board meeting of Rest for Africa. And I'd love to hear your take. One of the key findings of the report that we're launching today is that renewables are critically underfunded in Africa. How do we turn this around from your point of view? What role for many types of organizations, but especially yours, the multilateral development banks?
Well, there's been a growing trend over the past few years, especially post-COVID, and now with the fact that we're going through a conflict in Eastern Europe, that there is an economic downturn. So what we are finding that the governments themselves are not able to finance all these projects by themselves. There is a driving force towards green projects, renewable energy, being able to support some of them towards these kind of investments. And the EIB wants to be an active broker in terms of negotiating between the public sector and the private sector in implementing some of these projects, given the fact that the public sector will not be able to implement a lot of these power generation projects by themselves. So the idea is to be an honest broker and making sure that we have PPP models that can be successfully implemented in a sustainable manner, and that brings about a win-win situation between the public sector and the private sector. That's the first thing. We also want to ensure transparency between the public sector in being able to source the private sector investors. And that's why we support auction systems. We discussed earlier about being able to implement these kind of programs and being able to have the best qualified bidders in order to be able to set up this kind of power projects at the level of power generation. We also want to have more of an integrated approach, and not just about power generation, but in terms of power transmission and power distribution. I've seen over the past few years that there's been a growing interest in power generation. We've seen that 90%, we discussed, over 90% of the projects have tended to support power generation rather than transmission. We want to have a more integrated approach in terms of also supporting the whole grid and making sure that it is sustainable. We're looking at the aspects of power generation, but also in terms of power efficiency. Energy efficiency is also key. What is the cheapest source of energy we can possibly get? Is the existing power supply, power generation supply that is already available on the grid, which is being lost in transmission lines, in distribution lines. So we want to eliminate those losses in order so that they can become available. But we do at the same time, we're very conscious of the fact that the power generation or power demand is growing at an alarming scale, and we need to do more in terms of power generation as well.
Yes, many moving pieces indeed, as you say, generation, grids, transformation, distribution networks, digitalization, all the technologies that come with that. We're gathering, the world will be gathering at this end of the year at COP28. There's a lot of expectations in terms of what kind of COP this will be. International collaboration plays a major part in that. That's also why we're gathering here today. How do you see this moving forward? What would be an expected outcome given these objectives that EIB has? What would you like to see happen at COP?
I really would like to see a lot less of fragmentation between the DFIs. We're all moving in this parallel sections, and we should be coming together and present models that can workable. We are seeing a lot more going towards blended finance, being able to use technical assistance, grants, in order also to be able to support governments, but also to be able to conduct feasibility studies and provide capacity enhancement to the public sector. We also want to see more in terms of guarantees, and this is where the European Commission has set up the support for guarantee systems, and we're looking at the renewable energy, renewable infrastructure for sustainable energy, the RISE program that is now currently being analyzed as one of the possible potential programs that will be announced towards the COP, that will put together blended finance in terms of grants on the one side and in terms of guarantees and lending to support these kind of programs. So we're estimating 264 million of guarantees for the private sector, in terms of liquidity, de-risking liquidity support, but also de-risking political risk, so political risk mitigation. And on the other side, we are also providing the technical assistance in order to be able to implement and ensure the capacity of the off-takers is enhanced, so that to give comfort to the private sector investors that they can invest in this kind of project.
Wonderful. A real big plan ahead for the end of this year to stimulate private sector investment where it needs to go most. Thank you very much, Mr. Cocuzza, for your time.
Thank you.